So, hi Jonathan. You're from Micro Focuse and from cyber as part of that. And I understand that what you are doing is kind of like providing the full stack of tools needed for ensuring the, let's say, application supply chain. And in my own work, I know that I'm using kind of like different tools for that, starting from whatever, SonarQube for application code scanning, Drivi for image scanning, Burp Enterprise for external scanning. But I understand that you often offer a kind of like suite or portfolio of, to cover all of these sites, and probably also better than the self-standing products. So what is the, how is the CyberS different from my current potpourri of different tools?
Yeah, so at CyberS we're working with a tool called Fortify. It's a platform, a complete platform for application security testing. It includes both SAST, the static application security testing, DAST, dynamic application security testing, and also software composition analysis to ensure software supply chain security.
And how it's why it's better? How do you kind of like compare to others? Because
so you mentioned both SonarQube and Burp Suite, excellent tools. I've used them myself personally. What we actually would consider a difference between our SAST offering and say a tool like SonarQube is that we focus more on security, while other tools might be focusing more on code quality. Both are important, don't get me wrong. SonarQube is an excellent tool for making sure your developers write good quality code. But quality and security are slightly different topics in my opinion. And to ensure a high level of security, you need a tool that's built from the ground up to focus on security.
How do you test the application in SAST or static testing for security? What are the kind of like, hints or smells that it's looking for?
Yeah, so again, SAST or static testing is when you read the application source code. With SAST, you do the analysis at compile time, and you do things like flow analysis, state analysis, and see where data ends up, and you do branch tests and so on. And within SAST, we can find things that are found in source code. For instance, if you do a SQL injection and write it the wrong way in your code, and you do a SQL query the wrong way, you might get a SQL injection. It's still very common. 20 years later, we still have SQL injections. But a SAS tool can find SQL injections in many cases. Like you did concatenation of your database query. That's a really bad way to do it. You should do parameterization instead. And with SAS, you can tell a developer, hey, on this file, in this line, that's where the bug is. That's where you go and fix it.
Would it have detected, I think it was last week when we had a highly publicized problem with OpenSSL v3, which fortunately turned out not to be that bad. But I understand it was kind of like a, let's say, as you mentioned, the compiler level thing. It turned out that there was, again, some kind of buffer overflow question. And the comments were that if proper kind of like elementary, let's say, compiler time fuzzing or whatever they call it, was done, it could have been automatically tested. And it's here 2022. Buffer underflow is like the most basic thing, and we still can't detect them.
So I'm working for a cybersecurity vendor, and one thing that we as cybersecurity vendors are guilty of is that taking the last big exploit and saying, oh, if you just used our tool, we would have fixed that. I don't do that. Sure, if you do static testing, you might have found something in the OpenSSL source code, but again, this wasn't a very critical issue in the end. But you're talking about something really interesting. How do we make sure that libraries we use in our code, our open source components used in our code, are safe? Because even if we write the best code ever in our own software, what happens if one of your libraries appears to have a vulnerability in it? And that's how you use software composition analysis, where you analyze your third-party code, your open source code for known vulnerabilities, and advise the developer, hey, you should update this dependency or that dependency, and so on. For instance, if you were to write a web app today, you would use, say, for instance, Node.js, use NPM.
And like, I don't know, 3,000 or 10,000 different modules?
Yeah, you would have 3,000 modules in your small code. Yeah. And it's hard to have an overview of what of those models are actually safe. So a tool like our SCA tool will help you, advise you to tell you, okay, you have either a direct dependency on this vulnerable packet, you will upgrade it to the next version, and it will be done. You can click a button, you will actually automatically get a pull request, and it's fixed. And even though still you can have a packet that depends on another packet, that depends on a third packet, and that one is vulnerable. But your app will be vulnerable even if that app is vulnerable too.
Actually, there are two interesting problems. One is actually knowing that you have a vulnerable package. There are very many complexities of understanding why something is vulnerable and so on. And there is completely different subject is actually fixing that. The guy who was sitting next to me in office wanted to upgrade some oldish. It was a PHP something to latest PHP, also all of the modules. And it turned out that actually doing that was a rather complicated job. So how does actually having a nice whatever software bill of materials help you in this question? Because all of the dependencies, they kind of like are dependencies because they depend on each other. So do you also see from your tools some kind of help for that?
First of all, I think software bill of materials is something that we should really be focusing on as an industry. You know, when
does anybody know? Everybody know what it is? Can you?
Yeah, let me mention it. I mean, if you think of food, when you buy food, there's a list of ingredients in the food. If you buy hardware today, there's often a bill of materials, a BOM in it, that will list all of the components that are inside. For software, we should have a software bill of materials too. And I think as an industry, we should move on to have, well, on a software package, we should have some kind of machine-readable list of packets that are included, so that you as an end user can actually see, okay, we're using Log4j version 1.4, and that's vulnerable to Log4Shell, since we all know. So SBOMs really is the way forward for our industry and software.
Yeah, and I was kind of like thinking bill of materials is kind of like logistics guys thing and something. And exactly last week with OpenSSL case, I had the problem of, yeah, there is. Are we vulnerable? What are we telling if customers are asking? Yeah, okay, we have Cloudflare and everything in front, so it's not an issue. But anyway, is there in the backend something vulnerable?
Yeah.
And then I looked at our container image registry, which was like, I don't know, that long.
Yeah.
And then I look, and what versions? What actually in live even? So I kind of like had to go back and find from Kubernetes what's running there. And then I actually did run the software bill of materials for everything. And then I used grep to find all of the 5 instances that had old version. So software bill of materials is, and tools to kind of like work with that, I think are very important, especially from actually prioritizing your work.
Yes, you cannot secure what you don't know that you actually have.
Yeah, and actually if you have a bill of materials, then probably you can show it to manager. Like when you're going to the car repair shop, they are giving you the long list of completely not understandable things that they charge you 500 euros for. But there is a bill of things they did, so somebody is willing to pay for that. And probably also software bill of materials and list of things that need updating is just like go to your manager and say that I need to do some work. It's like long list of things.
Yes, and in fact, you can go even beyond vulnerabilities. We can have licensing audits also, so we can check to see that all your components, well, okay, so your developer yesterday included a GPL license component in your proprietary code. And does anyone know what happens if you have GPL code in your proprietary software? You have to publish the source code for the whole thing. That's something that most people don't want to do. So with the software composition analysis, you can also find if using the wrong license for components, I might change to another component.
So it could basically bring the similar amount of work to our lawyers like GDPR brought them and the privacy sphere. Okay. What are the main limitations? What do you think we can't do with these tools? Where are the things we still need to kind of like to manually, or which risks we need to think about software?
There's always going to be a risk of false positives. I mean, our tool does a lot of work to try to see, okay, so you are including a packet, but are you actually running that piece of code as vulnerable? And then in that case, are you actually running it in a critical part of the system? With a lot of work to try to find as high fidelity of the data as possible. But we can always do better. There's always a bit of work afterwards to see there might be false positives in the end. Something you need to be aware of.
Do you see kind of like a difference in all of these from our previous world and cloud? So does all of this work somehow, or has it changed over the last years?
I mean, many of our customers today are wanting to have something that's really easy to run and easy to start, and therefore we are offering mainly, or we are focusing also on our cloud offerings now. So you don't even have to install the tool on your system to be able to run SCA and DAST and SAST. You just log into one platform, our Fortify platform. You can do SAST, you can do DAST, you can do software composition analysis, all in one go, without having to learn new systems. And also have the developers not having to leave their development environments. You can have plugins straight for your IDEs, like Visual Studio or IntelliJ or Eclipse. So shifting left is important. That's when you have the developers fix the code vulnerability straight away.
Yes, and actually kind of like, I think the hardest part is actually kind of like making developers love these tools. Do you see how you kind of like onboard or kind of like get them to...
I'm a strong believer in showing developers the results of a security scan. So they can have transparency and see, okay, the code we wrote last week, that was vulnerable to this and this and this. Okay, then they will sort of understand, okay, well, maybe we should go back and fix it, or have the next time we're at something similar, we should be focusing on security and so on. So just telling them, oh, you need to write more secure code, that's not a good way to go. So having them onboarded and understanding the problem and helping them find a solution is really good.
Yeah, I must tell that actually one of the interesting things is because developers tend to be doing similar things day on, day out.
They're under a lot of pressure
doing some Jiras, and actually when I have given them output of some dynamics testing or some other findings, it is kind of like a, I don't know, not a distraction, but a distraction in a positive sense that, of course, I can do something cool.
They have something much to do. They have such pressure from their management to deliver on time and new features and get the bugs fixed. Security might often fall in behind just because of their priorities. It's not on them.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.